Okay, we're good. Awesome. Well, good morning. Good morning. So nice to be back with you champions. Okay, so we have a lot to cover today. Who here was either here at the office or on Zoom 2 weeks ago? Okay, so I did. Then for some of us, it's the first time plugging in, right, to the series. Okay, perfect. So for those, I'm just going to give a little 30-second recap. So what we did on session one, because this is actually 4 sessions of RPA mastery. Okay, so this is actually the second session. And as we get further into the series, the material starts to seem and it starts to sound a little more complex. Because in session one, it was, page 1, you kind of plug in, right, the fields and go over. But that's very important because who here has been in real estate under 2 years? Anyone under 2 years? Okay, so I can't, for those, because if we stop and think about it, anybody under 2 years may not know anything other than the grid. Like, so what does that mean? Do you remember the days before paragraph 3, which is that grid? We call it the grid. What was the contract like before that? Before CAR revised and reformatted to the grid, right? Which now it looks very nice with columns, right? And we plug that in. That's all in paragraph 3. Well, what that meant before that is when we used to have to present the offer, we would have to go through multiple paragraphs, right? With the seller, like we'd be like, oh, let's see if they ask for something over here on page 5. Oh, let's see if they ask for something on page 7. Oh, let's see, because it was all scattered, remember? Yeah. And then when we were going to counter offer, we'd have to do the same thing, right? We'd be like, oh, I can't miss that. So now, session 1, we covered the grid, and the grid is all the negotiating terms. That's all. That's where they're found. So it makes it super clean, right? If we need to counter something, we're only really going to counter. Very rarely will we counter something in the other paragraphs, but it's going to be something found in 3, right? Because those are the negotiating terms. So that's really what session 1 covered, is the grid completely, what those negotiating terms are. And didn't we also realize that part of the grid, part of that column structure, it references paragraphs, right? So for example, if we wanted to talk about the expiration of the offer, okay, that's in the grid, that's 3C. It tells us, it shows us what paragraph number is referenced. In other words, if I want more information regarding 3C in the grid, expiration of offer, I'm going to go to paragraph 32A. So the grid also tells us, right, which paragraph that specific term applies to. That's what we cover in sessions 2, 3, and 4. Those paragraphs that were referenced in the grid. Okay, super important. This is where it starts to get, and I'll be the first to tell you so you're prepared. The material is dense. It's a lot. Okay, especially because we're trying to cover everything in an hour. We started a little bit late, so we are going to run a little bit, obviously, over, right, 12 o'clock, because we're going to need all that time. And then we'll save Q&A for after, for those that may have to leave, right? We'll at least get through the material, and then I'm glad to stay. As long as you have questions, I'm willing to stay for those. So that's the way we're going to be able to get through this material. So the reason why I wanted to say that initially is because it's going to feel that way, right? It's going to feel kind of like, oh, that's a lot of words, or that sounds really complicated. But my role, my training method, I'm 100% all about simplification. Okay, I'd like to try to take the most complicated situation, scenario, term, phrase, clause, and I like to simplify it as much as possible. Okay, so that's my goal today, is that we're going to get through this material. What seemed and what started out kind of like chaotic and, like I said, wordy and confusing, by the end of today, I want it to feel like, oh, Oh, that's interesting. I didn't really know that that paragraph actually meant that. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so paragraph 4, because we just finished paragraph 3, right, in session 1. So paragraph 4 is now anything that we're going to need to incorporate as part of the RPA. Okay, whether it's addendums, advisories, certain disclosures. Okay, that's 4A, B, and C. The RPA itself, and I want to make a mention too before we start. Yesterday was the 16th, right? The new RPA was released. Okay, so we're actually looking at presenting. Ta-da! So this is the RPA June 2026 version. Okay, so when you go in to type an offer starting yesterday, it's the new RPA, which is here. Okay. Always expect changes twice a year, every June and every December. I'll go over those. It's not very, I talked a little bit last, actually, right, session 1. I touched on the changes and I'll touch on them as we go. It's not very many. Okay, so anyways, I wanted to make a note of that. So today, June 2026 RPA. Okay, and it actually in 4 had some changes. So in 4, the changes were, this is so funny, I never realized. I never realized that, look at 4B, the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships, AD. I didn't realize the AD was never part of the boxes. Okay, so that's new. All right. What they did is they kind of like cleaned up the bundle. We call it the bundle. You know what the bundle is, right? The bundle is when you go into zip forms, right? And it bundles all the different miscellaneous forms. So they cleaned that up to match really what the bundle looks like. So we have AD, and then C, they cleaned it up as well just by adding the BHIA, the Buyer Homeowner Insurance Advisory. That's now part of the bundle. It was also, but it wasn't, again, here. And they took out the California Consumer Privacy. I think it's like the CCPA. Okay, that's not here anymore. So it's not part of your bundle. Okay. Okay, so that's really the whole thing about paragraph 4. Next. Oops, am I doing this right? Justin? Justin. Okay, sorry guys. Anyone familiar? I know he showed me how to move. I was doing it fine last time. Moving this down. Okay, anyways, we could see paragraph 5. I'm sure he'll be back by then. If anybody sees Justin. Okay, so paragraph 5. Now we get into the grid terms. Okay, remember, kind of think back the grid. And the grid, if you think back, kind of starts talking about after you go over purchase price, right? Close of escrow date. It talks about deposit in the grid. So 5 is additional terms affecting the purchase price. This is not now introducing new terms. This is just elaborating on whatever you already put in the grid, okay? Which was paragraph 3. It's expanding on that. And it starts with the deposit. So what we really want to know for the deposit in 5A1 that we want to emphasize is wire transfer. So if you look at A1 regarding the initial deposit, the method, even though it already says that in the grid, but what we want to make sure we're reminded of and emphasize is that that's automatically defaults to a wire transfer. And that's what we want, right? Not a cashier's check, not a personal check, in fact, you'd have to always double check what's escrow, right? To even see if they some don't even accept those at all. Okay, so always double check on that. And then A2, retention of deposit. Now this is very important. Anything typically that is in bold, like it's there, we always want to pay extra attention to, okay? And retention of deposit comes up a lot when we come across like counter offers or addendums. And tell me if anyone's seen this before, okay? Either on a counter offer or an addendum. Buyer agrees, earnest money deposit is non-refundable after whatever, blah, 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 right? After 5 days, after 10 days, after buyer agrees to make deposit non-refundable, right? Or seller to retain, right? Deposit if Okay. So that's retention of deposit. That is actually there's a big warning sign on those. Why? Well, because the paragraph tells us that, especially because of paragraph 29, which is liquidated damages, we cover that in the very last session, okay, session 4, is initial by all parties or otherwise incorporated, and it specifies, remember, this is the dense, and then I'm gonna simplify it. So that specifies a remedy for buyer's default. Buyer and seller are advised to consult with a qualified California real estate attorney before adding any other clause specifying a remedy, such as release or forfeiture of deposit or making a deposit non-refundable for failure of buyer to complete the purchase. Any such clause shall be deemed invalid unless the clause independently satisfies the statutory liquidated damages requirement set forth in the Civil Code, and regarding possible liability and remedies if buyer fails to deliver the deposit. Wow. Right? What did I just read? No. Okay, what does that mean? That means because the buyer's deposit is capped out, paragraph 29, liquidated damages says that the seller can only, even in buyer breach, the buyer completely breaches, the seller can only retain 3%, okay, of the purchase price amount for damages if the purchase is an SFR 1 to 4 units and the buyer intends to occupy, so it's owner occupied, right? 1 to 4. So what the contract is saying, be careful, because what if your deposit is $50,000 and we're saying, yeah, it's non-refundable, right? It's God. You might have even invalidated, it's not valid because you can't violate the civil code. You can't contradict the civil code. So no, you can't make $50,000. I'm giving you the scenario, right? Yeah. Sales prices, let's say 500,000. You can't make $50,000 non-refundable because now you contradict the civil code. So talk to an attorney, talk to your broker, right? Whenever you see that type of verbiage, non-refundable deposits, seller to retain deposits.
So what if they sign up on contingencies?
Is it okay if we just wait for the question? Just, I'm sorry, or else we will, because there's so much material. That's a good question. I'll go over that. Is Justin back? Because I can't.
Hi, Gina.
Oh, arrow down.
Yeah, does it work
Hi.
with arrow keys?
Let's see. No, it's not. Oh, Justin. Hi, Justin. Sorry. I know I need to scroll down and I don't know. Oh, was the little mouse not there? Sorry. Okay. So now we're going to start moving kind of fast because it's a lot. Okay. 5B is all cash offer. We already know if it's an all cash. Do we need a loan? No, that's what that says. C. Now we move over to the loan. So first loan is, what does the first loan always default to? What type of loan does it automatically? We don't have to check any boxes. Conventional. Okay. Anytime you're typing up an offer, unless you check a box in the loan section, it's going to say my buyer's getting a conventional loan. Okay. That's what this C1 talks about. C2, same thing with additional financed amount. 3, loan status, C3. Do you know this contract gives me the consent as the listing agent to contact the lender and get a status of the buyer's loan, right? Okay, that's all it says. So like nobody needs to get, offended or why is the listing agent calling the lender? No, the contract says I can. Now, I'm not asking for confidential information. I'm just saying, what is the what? What is C3 titled? C3 is titled what in bold? Buyer's loan status. That's all I'm asking. What is the buyer's loan status? Okay, so that's what that. 4, FHA. Now, if you did check a box for FHA or VA, we talked a little bit about this last time, then that brings in that amendatory clause, right? FVAC. Let's make sure what we also know, like the very end of that paragraph says, for FHA, VA, what's the very last sentence? It says, notwithstanding, I'm in the very last sentence of C4, whoever's following along, notwithstanding seller's agreement that buyer may obtain FHA or VA financing, seller has what? No obligation to pay or satisfy any or all lender requirements unless agreed in writing. We're just letting everybody know up front. Doesn't matter if you said it's FHA or if it's VA, seller's under no, unless we already agreed to something in writing ahead of time, seller's under no obligation to do any FHA or VA. We just want to make that clear, right, from the beginning. Okay, balance of purchase price. Makes sense, right? That needs to be deposited with escrow prior to the close of escrow. E, limits on credits to buyer. This is another one of those really dense, like what in the world did that just say? This is what that paragraph means, because I don't think I'm going to have time to read each paragraph. It says that there's something known as a contractual credit and a lender allowable credit. Okay. What that says is, which one do you think supersedes and prevails? The contractual credit or the lender allowable credit? The contract says automatically the lender allowable credit. Doesn't matter what my contract, if I got $15,000 in closing costs, that's considered a contractual credit. If my lender, because of the loan program, says I'm capped out at 5,000, 10,000, what's gonna take precedence? The lender. And that's what this paragraph says. Limits on credits to buyer. That's what it's called. 6, additional financing terms. This is super simple. If you remember back in the grid, right? You attached, hopefully, to your offer, the verification of down payment and closing costs to make your offer look strong. The verification of loan application, which is really what? Pre-approval letter, underwriter approval, pre-qualification, something showing that, hey, my buyer's qualified, right? To get financing. So that's what A, B referred to. And then C, buyer stated financing. Now this one I do need to take a few seconds on. This comes up a lot. Buyer stated financing. Sellers relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified. Before I finish reading, this answers what common question? Let me tell you. The common question that says this, and I think I talked with somebody about this 2 weeks ago here. So I know that I said in my contract, my buyer's getting a conventional loan, right? But the lender can actually get them a better rate on an FHA. Can I just switch? That's a common question, right? Can I just switch to an FHA? This paragraph answers that. So it says, seller has relied on the type of financing, right? So, hey, seller relied that it's a conventional loan. That's what you said it was going to be, right? The down payment amount, whether it's contingent or not. Seller has agreed to a specific closing date. You said 30 days. They've relied on a purchase price. You said you're going to pay me, right? $500,000. And to sell the buyer in reliance on that financing. Buyer shall pursue the financing specified in the agreement, even if buyer also elects to pursue an alternate form of financing. Seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than that specified in the agreement. This is the key. But shall not interfere with closing at the purchase price on the close of escrow date, even if based on alternate financing. Buyer's inability to obtain alternate financing does not excuse buyer from the obligation to purchase the property and close escrow as specified. So the answer would be, if somebody was to ask me that, I'd say, possibly. Let me tell you why. Because if you tell me at week 3 and you're supposed to close in 4 weeks that you want to switch a loan, can your lender close it in 1 week? No, they're going to need 3. Well, then probably not. You're probably not going to be able to. Why? Because the seller relied on the closing date. They don't need to give an extension. So that answer, right, it's going to depend on where you're at in the stage of the transaction. If it's very early, then there probably shouldn't be any problems at all. Seller doesn't have to cooperate, but they can't interfere. That's the key. Okay, 7, closing and possession. So closing and possession is basically what we want to keep in mind here is the TOPA. Remember we talked a little about the TOPA, the tenant occupied property addendum, but obviously doesn't only refer to tenants, right? It's any other adult occupant in the property other than the seller. So it could be relatives that are living with the seller. We got to be really careful. But what's important about this paragraph is that if the buyer intends to occupy one of those units, they need to make sure they relay that to the seller, right? For example, I'm buying a triplex, okay? As the buyer, I intend to occupy unit 1. I don't care about the other units, okay? just unit one. So that's what that paragraph is saying is we need to make sure to disclose that, right, to the seller within 3 days. What unit needs to be vacant at the time of close of escrow. 7B, condition of property on closing. I love this one. You know why? Because this is the one that comes up whenever we see counteroffers, addendums that say all parties are made aware the property is sold as is. And I'm like, yeah, the contract says that. Look, 7B, unless otherwise agreed, the property shall be delivered as is. Okay? So this is already an as-is contract. Okay? Just so you know. And now it doesn't hurt to sign it, but it's like, it's redundant, right? It's like just repeating yourself. I don't like it, but it's not to say that it's wrong. You just don't have to, right? So our California RPA is already an as-is contract. Now, that can all be, right, subject to maybe buyer makes a request, blah, 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 blah. We get into that in the other paragraphs. But it's important for us to know that we're already dealing with an as-is contract. Now, why don't we want to skip this paragraph? Of course, we should never want, especially with a seller. So if we're a listing agent, okay? I know I mentioned this last time. I have a love-hate relationship with technology, right? I started over 30 years ago. We didn't even have internet. So this is one of those paragraphs that I like to use the example of that at that time, even though it's so much more efficient now, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm a big user of DocuSign and digital signatures. However, that's the part that I love is the efficiency. What I don't love is the fact that it has separated us and excused us from having to take the time to review the contracts with our clients. I used to have to go to their house, sit at the dining table, and go page by page. Why? Because there was no internet, there was no email, the fax machine had barely come out, and you were considered like, woo, if you had a fax machine, okay? So that's the part that I really feel we don't talk enough about. If I send a client a contract, whether it's a seller or a buyer, I'm saying I'm sending it to you for digital signature. What time can we talk by phone to go over the terms? Super important. Look at what B says. Even though it's as is, it's telling the seller. Look, right on the second line, it says the property, including the pool, the spa, the landscaping, the grounds, is to be maintained in substantially the same condition as of the date of acceptance. Okay, so if my seller just moved out to Texas, do they still need to keep the landscaping maintenance? Do they still need to have the pool service? Okay, there's no excuse. All of that still has to be maintained. The excuse can't be, oh, but we moved out. The contract doesn't give that excuse. Okay, seller shall not be responsible to repair any holes left after. Okay, that's good to know, right? That's a common one. Seller say, hey, I'm going to take a bunch, all my painting, my wall things. Do I have to repair? No, you don't. Okay. All debris and personal property not included in the sale shall be removed. So seller, you have boxes stacked from the floor all the way to the ceiling in your garage. You have trash and debris all over your backyard. We're gonna need to make sure that's removed by when? By the close of escrow date or at the time of possession is delivered to the buyer. If items are not removed, what if they leave all of that? They just bailed. Can't get a hold of them. They ghost. They ghost everybody, like has happened. Well, if those items are not removed when possession is delivered to buyer, all items shall be deemed abandoned. Buyer after first delivering to seller written notice to remove the items within 3 days may pay to have such items removed or disposed of and may bring legal action as per this agreement to receive reasonable cost from the seller. Seller, if I have to pay a hauling company $1,500 to haul all that stuff that you were supposed to remove, I have the contractual right to sue you in small claims court and recoup my money. Because we get asked that a lot, right? What do we do? Like, what are our options? The seller left all the stuff. The contract tells us what our options are. First, you hit them with a notice, 3 days, come get all your stuff out. And if they don't, it's considered abandoned and I can pay to have somebody remove it and I can try to recuperate my money for doing that.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay. C, buyer strongly advised to conduct investigations of the entire property because didn't we just say it's as is? right? So buyer, this is you're buying the house as is, the way you see it, present condition as of the date of acceptance, but you are encouraged to investigate all aspects. We talk about that in the next session in paragraph 12. D, seller remaining in possession. If we have a seller that both parties have agreed is going to stay in the property, all this paragraph says is make sure they've consulted insurance companies and all of that. We don't give advice. We don't know if what constitutes a landlord tenant. Does it become a landlord tenant situation? I don't know. I'm not an attorney, so we need to make sure we consult the appropriate professionals. E is warranties. If somebody asked what were the changes, they all they did was give titles to these two paragraphs, E and F. They didn't have titles before. So warranties now has the title name warranties, but nothing else changed. And access is now called access, but the information stays the same. The good thing about warranties is, because when people say, ooh, warranties are assigned. Well, the paragraph says available copies. So like if the seller has available copies of the warranties, then those obviously would want to be passed on. If they don't have available copies, they don't need to worry about anything. Okay. And then access, the thing about access that I like to point out is the very last sentence. Because the first part is very obvious, right? You got to make sure you give access, operate all locks, mailboxes, so forth and so on. But what's important about this one, because I've handled several actually disagreements that have resulted of this. Buyer may, the very last sentence in F, buyer may be required to pay a deposit to the HOA to obtain keys to accessible HOA facilities. That's come up. So we got to pay attention to that, right? Let your buyers know, hey, if this is, okay, it's in a HOA, it's a condo, it's a townhome, there's an HOA. The HOA might say, because a lot of it's digital, right? Digital keys for the pool, digital keys for the gym, they're not going to just let that seller give you their old digital key. They want reprogramming. They want, who's going to pay for the deposit of the new digital key? The buyer. Have I caught calls from buyers upset because they don't feel they should? They feel the seller should have been the one to give them digital keys to the pool. No, contract says, sorry. HOA, we can't control what the HOA wants, right? HOA might charge a fee for new keys. Okay, 8, contingencies. Now, this is a big one. Remember in the grid, how many contingencies did we say? Anybody remember? I know it was a lot to remember. 8. And what paragraph are we looking at right now? 8. Okay, so 8 contingencies automatically built into the contract unless you modify them out. And if you ever need information on them, what paragraph do you go to? 8. 8 and 8. Okay, so contingency first is loan. Okay, what this paragraph really wants to emphasize is that make sure we understand that the loan contingency is completely separate than like the appraisal contingency. You can't mix the two. Okay, so what A1 is saying is that you also can't mix, like it says, appraisal or insurance. Now, the reason why it identifies those two specifically, why would it talk about appraisal contingency in A1, and why would it talk about insurance contingency right there on the 3rd line if we're talking about a loan contingency? Because those two affect the loan, right? Does an appraisal affect the loan? Does insurance affect the loan? So what the contract is saying is, all we're saying is make sure, don't waive those if you're not sure, right? And then later on say, oh, but we have the loan contingency. It's okay. It's okay. Because if it doesn't appraise, let's go ahead and remove the appraisal contingency, or let's go ahead and remove the insurance because I got the loan contingency still. That's what it's saying. Don't do that because those are independent contingencies. You can't use those later if you're not able to get the loan. So be careful, okay? The next one is 2 is also insurability. 3, contractual. Ooh, let's look at A3. A3 says buyer is advised. I'm sorry, A3? We already talked about insurability. Sorry, yes. Buyer's contractual obligations regarding deposit, balance of down payment, and closing costs, in bold, are not contingencies of this agreement. What does that mean? That means if my buyer says they're going to give $100,000 down payment and they blow it, They can't, that's not a contingency. I can't say, oh, sorry, I need it, buyer canceled, needs their deposit back because they don't have the 100,000 anymore. Deposit, down payment are not, closing costs are not contingencies of this agreement. I can't, that's not a valid reason to cancel if they blew that money. Okay, so we need to have that conversation with them. Buyer, everything we've represented in this offer, your credit, your down payment, your closing costs, absolutely can have no changes. Okay, because if that changes, we're not able, right? If the down payment amount, you all of a sudden don't have it, we can't use that as a basis for cancellation. Can we hold the question? Yeah, thank you. Just make a note, mental note. Okay, and then we already said not to confuse appraisal and loan. Okay, appraisal contingency B. Now, what's important about this is that the appraisal contingency is the contingency that protects, right, the buyer in regards to value, right? We want to make sure, hey, buyer's like, I'm willing to pay 500,000, but the property has to appraise for 500,000 in order for me to continue, right? Now, what's important about this is the third line in that paragraph, B1, right where it says, without requiring repairs or improvements of the property. Okay, now this is something I wish they would almost make it a little more obvious, because this is what protects the buyer, that if we get an appraisal and it's subject to repairs, right? Don't we have that sometimes? I mean, we always ask our lenders, right? Hey, did the appraisal come back? Is there any required repairs? Like, we're used to asking all that, but we don't realize sometimes that the contract actually protects the buyer. That's part of the appraisal contingency. So even if it's value, but it needs A, B, C, and D, right? Repairs. No, the buyer doesn't have, you're not going to remove the appraisal contingency until you know who's going to make those repairs. Because the contingency says it's without needing or requiring those repairs. In other words, I'm good removing that contingency. It came in at value, but who's going to do the chipping paint? FHA will call that out, right? Who's going to do the whatever, broken window in the living room? Who's going to, before we remove appraisal contingency, we want to make sure, because the appraisal contingency protects the buyer in those situations. Okay, and the very end, the middle, where it says, however, the ability to cancel based on the measurements, now it's bringing in something else. The measurements provided in an appraisal falls within the investigation of property contingency. Oh, okay. So that's, wow. So we got to be careful, because if we removed our investigation contingency, but the appraisal comes back and it measures 300 square feet less than what the buyer thinks, can't cancel based on appraisal contingency. That would have been investigation contingency. Okay, so make sure that we understand the difference. And it also says at the very end, for any cancellation based, at the very last sentence of that paragraph, for any cancellation based upon this appraisal contingency, buyer shall deliver a copy of the written appraisal to seller upon request by seller. Okay, so if we cancel it because we say, sorry, the property didn't appraise, we got to back it up. We got to back it up with a copy. Okay, Fair Appraisal Act notice. The only thing I need to mention about that is that that is a law that protects both sellers and buyers if they feel that there was discrimination in the appraisal process. And it gives them the website where to file a complaint. Okay. We're talking still about contingencies, right? We're in the contingency paragraph still, 8C, investigation of property. What I like to highlight on this one is the second sentence in that investigation of property. I'm going to just read the whole thing. This agreement is, as specified in paragraph 3L, contingent upon buyer's acceptance of the condition of and any other matter affecting the property. I don't know about you, but how much more can you get than any other matter affecting the property? That's pretty broad. So the question is this: can a buyer cancel based on the investigation of property contingency regarding any aspect of the property? Yes. Yes. You can't get what any other matter. We talk about that when we get to paragraph 12 in the next session, and I'll give you all sorts of examples. Next contingency, insurance. Okay, insurance we said is its own independent. Make sure we know it's completely separate than the loan contingency, and it's a two-part contingency. It's conditioned upon buyer's assessment of the availability of insurance and approval of the cost. Two things. So number one, buyer, we need to make sure that we have insurance available in this area. And even if there is insurance available, you need to make sure you're comfortable with the cost of it. Two parts to satisfy that contingency. Review of seller documents. We know the seller has, how many of you guys remember in session 1? How many days to give us all seller documents? It was in the grid, 7. Okay. How many days does the buyer have? 17. Okay. And we talk more about that when we get to paragraph 11 in our next session. F, title. Title contingency. We don't need to be title experts. So I'm not a title officer. I'm not a title rep. But I have really a good, really title rep that can help me, right? If there's something I don't understand about the prelim or the, but this is what we do need to know. You need to have a general understanding of how to read a prelim. Why? Because if you're sitting in front of a buyer or you're calling a buyer and you're saying, hey, it's time for us to remove all contingencies, right? Title's listed on the CR form. Have we gone over the title report with them? I mean, we're asking them to remove the title contingency. Did we say, I've reviewed the prelim, we're good? Okay. That's why you need to understand. And it actually says, right in the third line, it's really regarding the status of the title. That's what we're looking for. Okay. We're not, again, experts. We want to make sure the status of the title and any underlying documents and any matters affecting title, including but not limited to any documents or deeds referenced in the prelim and any plotted easements. Yeah. Okay. So we want to see okay, there's 6 deeds. There's 6 trust deeds on this property. Should that be a red flag for me as a buyer's agent? Yeah. If it says there's 2 easements that affect the property, should that be a red flag for me as a buyer's agent? Yeah. Okay. G, condominium, those are the HOA docs, separate contingency. And we talk a little bit more about that in paragraph 11. H is the review of the leased or liened items. That comes up a lot, right? With solar panels, especially. What we want to emphasize in this paragraph is found right in the middle of that paragraph where it says any assumption of the lease shall not require any financial obligation or contribution by the seller. So it says. So it says, yeah, seller, you're disclosing it, right? It's a buyer contingency. Buyer's got to be okay with the monthly payment, whatever we're asking them to assume. But don't ask me to contribute 10,000 or expect. You can ask, but don't expect for me to contribute 10,000 for the payoff. I'm just not obligated to do it. I can to negotiate, but I'm not obligated to. Believe it or not, we have quite a bit of buyers that actually think that the seller's obligated to pay solar off. Okay, removal or waiver of contingencies. We did talk a little bit about this. Also, remember where it says you're acting against agent advice. That was very emphasized, right? Over in the grid. If they decide to tell you, hey, let's go ahead and remove contingencies with the offer, be careful. That's what that paragraph says, okay? J is the removal of the contingency or cancellation. The J1 says for any contingency specified over in the grid or elsewhere, buyer shall within the applicable period specified, it's really one of 2 things. Either what? Remove the contingency or cancel the agreement. That's it. Those are our choices. Now, we always say, oh, but can't they ask for a request? Yeah, but the contract also says the seller doesn't even have to respond to our request. So that's not part of this. Really, the only 2 options we have when it comes to ending the contingency time period is one of 2 things. Either remove it or cancel. That's the whole point of giving them that allotted time frame. So that's what we need to know about J. K is the COP form. That means what? If my buyer needed to needed to sell their current property to buy this one, You can build in that contingency. It's not part of the 8 automatic contingencies. It's an optional contingency to add the COP form. Okay, 9, items included and excluded. Oh, this is one of my favorites. Not really. Okay, note to buyer and seller. I am going to read this. Okay, 9A. Look at 9A. Items listed as included or excluded in the MLS, flyers, marketing materials, or disclosures are not included in the purchase price or excluded from the sale unless specified in this paragraph or paragraph 3P or as otherwise agreed. Any items included herein are components of the home and are not intended to affect the price. All items are transferred with it without seller warranty. So are you telling me that if the MLS and even a flyer said new stainless steel appliances or said washer dryer stackables or made a reference to a particular item, you're telling me those aren't included? Yeah, unless they're here in 9B. So that's where we got, right? And that works both ways. We have to be careful as listing agents, right? To make sure we know we're not, let's not just put it in the description, right? If we know the seller is not going to include it, let's not do that because it's just going to create problems later. But the MLS, why is it not? Why would it not be included if that's the way the property was marketed? Because the MLS is not a contract. Plain and simple. Okay? The MLS is not a contract between a buyer and a seller. This is. Okay, so 9B1, all existing fixtures and fittings. B2, what I would like to point out in B2, this is one of those little homework things, if you want to actually read as far as what's included. What I do want to point out is, believe it or not, what seems to come up regularly, disputes and disagreements over items included in the paragraph. Shutters, window coverings, which includes blinds, curtains, draperies, shutters or any other material that cover any portion of the window, pool and spa equipment like the pool nets, water purifiers, those are all included. Please don't take the pool nets, the pool equipment. Okay, please don't take down your curtains. Ah, it's a big one, right? Okay, curtain, people like to take those custom draperies. Tell your seller, don't take them unless you exclude them in writing. Okay. And then we're still under included. 3 talks about security systems. There's a lot of those new techie motion detectors and all that. Those are included. Home automation systems like smart home features, you know, those Ring doorbells. And now you can have those Nest thermostats. All of that's included. Those smart devices. Okay. 5, though, I'm really glad they made sure we know. Non-dedicated devices, however, because if I control, the smart homes are very elaborate. So if I control these smart features with my phone, does that mean that my phone comes with it? No. Okay. So that's a non-dedicated device, an iPad, right? I'm not going to have to include just because it controls the whole home. Here's the iPad. Now, if it's dedicated, meaning if the system comes with a special iPad only for that, then that is included. Okay, 6, leased or liened items and systems included. Okay, but they got to be disclosed to the buyer. We're still under items included. 7, seller represents that they own all those items and there's no lien. So that's really great, right? If something's included, like an alarm system, but if it comes with a $10,000 lien to it, right? All of that has to be disclosed. Items excluded from the sale, C, flat screens, speakers, even if they're anchored or with a bracket. Just the bracket, just that alone, just because it's a TV or a speaker, don't assume that it's included. Okay. Then it says in bold, unless otherwise specified in paragraph 3P1, brackets attached to the walls, floors, or ceilings for any such component, furniture, or item will be removed and holes or other damage shall be repaired. But I thought we had just read that. Oh, but the other paragraph was really, really clear. It said wall hangings and paintings, like shelves. It's very different. So the contract wants us to know, it wants us to, I think it could do a better job, to be honest, because we have disputes about this, over what holes then need to be repaired. So you just told me on the other page, right? Holes don't have to be repaired, but here I'm saying the holes have to be repaired, not painted. Well, yes, but it's only relating to these items here, like TVs, projectors, furniture that's anchored. Like, there's like, if I have a big giant wall cabinet and it's anchored for earthquake resistance, right? And I take off that wall cabinet, it's probably gonna look pretty bad behind it, right? With those brackets. That does have to be. So the other paragraph that we talked about was talking about portraits, kind of like your minor, right? Your minor stuff. That's the difference. Okay, 10, allocation of costs. Remember in the grid, that paragraph that we talked about, like who's going to pay for what and like certain reports and all of that. Now that's where 10 comes into play. It's elaborating on that part of the grid. And what we want to make sure we understand in 10A is that no matter who we checked off, like seller to pay for this, right? Buyer to pay for this, seller to pay for this. The second sentence in 10A says, it does not determine who is to pay for any work recommended or identified in that document. So it's very clear. They want us in the grid to make sure we understand. If we're asking for a pest control report, for example, or a certain report, it's only saying who's going to pay for the report. It's not saying and who's going to pay for what. But it tells us what do we do then if we do want to address. We also want the seller to pay, and I know we talked a little about this last time, section 1 items, right? Of a termite report, for example. It says, that would need to be specified if you keep reading the sentence. Payment of required work should be specified elsewhere in 3Q or 3R or in a separate agreement, such as a request for repairs, a seller response for request for repairs, an addendum, or an AEA. Anybody use the AEA? Do we know what the AEA is? Uh-huh. I'm actually a big fan of it. It's the amendment of existing agreement. It looks like a counteroffer, but that's the form that the powers that be really want us to use in situations. The addendum, they actually want us only to use when we're only referring to the exact offer at the time of the offer. But if the contract has been accepted, so it's post acceptance, the suggestion is that we always use the AEA, not an addendum any longer. AEA, because it looks like, in other words, if I now want the seller, this is, remember, post, okay? Post acceptance. I'm going to give you the most common one. Appraisal came in at 450. My purchase price is 500. Can I ask the seller to lower to 450?
Yes.
Should I do that on an addendum or an AEA? Yes, because the addendum changes the terms of the contract. We don't have the unilateral ability to change. We're saying purchase price shall be 450,000. We can't do that. We need, right? We can't do that unilaterally. The AEA is a proposal. It even says at the top. So it'll say purchase price, buyer proposes, or the party making this document, creating this document, proposes the following. Oh, purchase price shall be 450,000. Buyer signs it. I deliver it to the seller. Oh, they're proposing. Okay. And it looks just like a counteroffer. They can accept it or reject it. Ah, okay. And it says, and if you accept it, it's now part of the contract. Well, it's called amendment of existing agreement. Yeah. Okay. But that's the first mention of AEA. That's why I bring it up, because you really won't see it anywhere else in the contract. 10B, remember those retrofit government point of sale? Okay, that's where this is elaborating on. Super important to understand the difference between 1 and 2. 1 is legally required installations and property improvements, and 2 is point of sale. What's the difference? B1 is specific to smoke alarms, carbon monoxide devices, and securing of the water heater. Why? Because that is law. Okay, that's why the paragraph is called legally required. Okay. Anything other than that is not legally required necessarily. We'll talk about that because there's all sorts of new laws too that can affect that. So what it's saying is that whoever we identified over in the grid, right? We checked off, if you remember, right? It's either buyer or seller. But it's very specific. That's only for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, and water heater breathing. 2, though, is a point of sale inspection report and repair that refers to any such action required to be completed before or after close of escrow that are required in order to close under any law, which is usually what? A city or a county, okay? And paid by whoever we specified over in the grid. Has to be done prior to the final walkthrough, known as the final verification of property condition, and that also applies to the defensible space. So what does that mean? Let's talk about point of sale. That comes up quite a bit. First of all, I have a general idea of what cities require pre-sale or point of sale, and it's hard to keep up. But there is a very helpful website that you can refer to if anybody wants to jot it down right now. And it's retrofitla.com. Okay, that tells you the city. So if you just ever want to quickly look it up, retro. So RETRO FITLA.com. And that will tell you the cities, and it's constantly being updated in case there's any changes. So the point is this. We need to, number one, never make it seem like we know for sure, unless we do, because that's going to affect how we prepare the offer, right? So if we're preparing the offer and we know, like City of Los Angeles has, right? I think Azusa, I don't know if Pomona does. Compton. Okay, so then that's where we're gonna, right? We're gonna probably want to either we're gonna identify who's gonna pay for not just the report, but any what's called required action, right? You can identify all of that up front better once you know. Okay. Either way, though, 2B makes it very clear buyer needs to be provided within 7 days. It doesn't matter who pays for it, a copy of that government conducted or point of sale inspection report. It's a contingency, okay? We gotta make sure that someone gets it paid for. Should be no argument over who pays for it because that should have already been identified. And there's no question as to whether the buyer needs it. The contract says the buyer has to have it, okay? So reinspection fees. I like this one. But this one refers only going back to the legally required, which we said was what? Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, and water heater anchor bracer strapped. What happens if our buyers, the appraiser goes out, right? And sorry, there was no smoke detectors. There was no carbon monoxide devices. The water heater was not anchored, bracer, strapped. And we already know, what does that mean? Appraiser loves those reinspection fees, right? They could be costly, $150. I think I saw one the other day. It was like $300 because it was a multifamily unit property. Who pays for that? How is that the buyer's fault? It's not the buyer's fault. Seller, remember in the grid, we said you had X number of days to make sure they're installed. So it says if it's not completed and the lender requires an additional inspection to be made, seller shall be responsible for any corresponding reinspection fee. If buyer incurs those costs to comply with the lender requirements concerning those items, seller shall be responsible. So that's another reason why we don't want to just bypass all these terms when we're talking to a seller, right? Hey, seller, when I went to meet you at our listing appointment, I noticed you didn't have, right? I didn't see any carbon monoxide devices. You're going to want to make sure to do that right away, right? Okay. Information and advice on requirements. So everything I just talked about, I'm not an expert. This is what this contract says, right? Agents do not, the very last sentence in 4, agents do not have expertise in this area and cannot ascertain all of the requirements or costs of compliance. I can guide you. I can show you those resources. I can help you, right? Once we get reports to the best of my ability, but I'm not responsible, obviously, right? I don't have expertise in that area. C, home warranty, super simple. Even if the buyer elected originally not to, it just says the buyer can at any time still purchase a home warranty at whose expense? At buyer's expense. Because if they didn't ask for it, right, in the beginning, they can always add it, don't panic, but it'll be at the buyer's expense. Okay, 11, let's see. Oh, actually, let's see, I think that's where, ooh, yeah, are we, what time is it? Yes, woo! 12:02, we made it, guys. That is session two. That is session two. Now you can imagine session, so out of all the sessions, which one do you think is the chunkiest? Or the most concentrated? It wasn't this one, I gotta tell you. This is a warm-up, guys, okay? This is a warm-up. Session 3, okay? Session 3, we cover paragraphs 11 through 14. Those are the most, even though it doesn't sound like a lot, but those are the heavier paragraphs. Okay, so session 3, this was a little warm up, and I know there was multiple questions. And I want to be able to, whether it's on Zoom or whoever has questions now, to feel free to ask those, because I know we had to skip over. I just really wanted to cut to that. Do you remember your question? Yeah. When you say amendment, can you elaborate? Because when I think amendment, I think escrow.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
So it has to do with escrow, and you do it.
So I guess the question is, or the way I understand it is, what would we do as agent?
Yeah.
We don't create amendments because we're not escrow.
Right, but all forms, it has an amendment and an addendum.
Oh, then-
Choices on the form.
Oh, yeah, so that's the AEA, the Amendment of Existing Agreement. That's the one we talked about. So Amendment of Existing Agreement, AEA, is used post-acceptance. So in other words, anything that is changing after the offer has been accepted, it's not to say that you can't use an addendum, it's just what is ideal, right? The reason why the addendum is not necessarily ideal is in the scenario I gave you, right? If we're having to do a price reduction because an appraisal, do we as the buyer's agent have the right to addendum the whole purchase price because the appraisal came back lower? No, unless I have an email from the listing agent saying, yeah, I talked to my seller, we're good with 450, go ahead and do it. Then I can argue and say an addendum, I guess, would be okay, but an addendum doesn't propose changes. That's not the intention of an addendum. The addendum actually changes the whole contract. And we wouldn't want to do that with just on a unilateral proposal. So the unilateral proposals are amendment of existing agreement, AEA.
That's a very good question.
Yes, very good, thank you.
The listing agent disclosed on the area that the property is going to be sold in a cease condition. Okay, we go to escrow. And we did the appraisal, and the appraisal said, this transaction or this value is going to be subject to the following repairs. The term as is condition, what happened in that situation?
So interestingly, we covered that, right? In the loan and the appraisal. So in that very exact situation, the seller is not obligated to do any repairs to the property.
Even the appraisal?
Even the appraisal. I could show you, it was back in the appraisal,
Yes, of the.
it's on the previous.
On page 6.
Yeah.
5.
Yeah, it was right under, isn't that interesting? That comes up a lot. Yeah. Oh, a little down.
Like there is a B. Like there be one, the agreement is unless otherwise. That one is a little off.
I think it was actually under low, I think it was under financing, actually. Right here. See where it says FHA, VA?
Hello.
So loans, number 4. Very last sentence. Notwithstanding seller's agreement that buyer may obtain FHA or VA, seller has no obligation to satisfy any or all of lender requirements unless agreed in writing. Yeah.
Okay, if the seller is not obligated, the buyer can do the repairs.
It's
because
completely
it's not their
negotiable.
fault.
It's, at that point, we go back to the drawing board, we go back to the negotiating table. And otherwise, the buyer can cancel based on the appraisal contingency because it had condition, right? Yeah, that, we say, hey, what, right? This is what the.
Some of the repairs with the buyer, you guys.
Yeah, and that's why, right? Sometimes they don't do it. So yeah, so I could probably give you 5 different ways to come to solve that,
I
but
actually told my seller,
yeah,
if you don't fix it.
yeah,
There's no deal, because
well, yeah, there's
the
not.
buyer can't come and
Yeah.
fix your
Yeah.
house.
Yeah,
What if we
Yeah.
top of it?
Yeah.
Who's gonna pay?
and if it was an FHA loan, and let's just say the seller's like, I'm done with this buyer, like, let's just cancel. What happens with that appraisal? That FHA appraisal? It stays for 6 months. So, oh, I don't know, maybe last I checked, it was 6. That would actually probably be better if it was 3. But yeah, it used to back in my days. No. 6 months. So I'd be like, well, then we probably won't be able to sell again to FHA for 6 months, because that same appraisal is gonna follow with it. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
I disclosed that, well, I disclosed that in the MLS.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
what else did I tell?
Yeah, so that's in several areas. So solar, we'll get to that in our next session, disclosures. There's an actual, it's called, guess what it's called? Solar. So form solar is actually, you're gonna have your seller fill it all out. And that actually has to be delivered to the buyer. It's part of the 7-day requirement that the seller
So I
has.
still have 7 days then.
Yeah, so that's part of your 7 days. It's also on your SPQ. You're-
Okay, yeah, I see.
Okay, so it's gonna be multiple, it's gonna be on the SPQ and it's gonna have its own form called solar. All of that is part of the 7 days, so make sure within 7 days of acceptance, the seller delivers all of that to the buyer.
When you have a property that's in the MLS, it's 3-1, but on title it's a 2-1, so and you can't find any permit. What would you do as far as the appraisal?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell the appraiser how to appraise it, right? But typically in those cases, what you want to, I'm assuming you're the buyer's agent or you're the listing agent? Yeah. So right away, again, might be a little old school. Remember what I told you guys last time? Whenever I type up an offer, what do I pull first?
Title.
Property profile, deed, right? So for me, I'm already kind of having those conversations, right? Like, hey, the tax assessor says it's 2 bedrooms,
Yeah.
the MLS says 3, right? So I'm already kind of giving the buyer, like, we're gonna want to investigate this further, right? To make sure, and the appraiser is gonna, like, it's kind of like you're already having that conversation. Because yeah, it might be an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's go back to where well, is there any more questions, first of all? I'm happy to, if you think of something. You see how when we first started, right? I hope you kind of got a little bit of a simplified version of these paragraphs. I tried to simplify it to the best of my ability versus if we were to, I could read it, but, so this is interesting. What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? I feel after 30, almost 35 years, I could say developed wisdom in my, yeah, like knowledge is if I just read you all these paragraphs,
Yeah.
right? And you have knowledge of it.
Yeah.
What's wisdom?
Knowledge is coming for the man, and knowledge and wisdom coming for that.
I love it. And experience, right? That's why, oh, listen to your elders. There's a reason.
Yeah.
I like to, again, because I simplify everything, knowledge is knowing what to say. This is what to say. You could read this and you've transmitted knowledge, right? Wisdom is knowing when and how to say it. Right? Yes, yes, yes. Right? And so it's not what, again, you could read it, but how would you say it? How would I say that? Right? So I like to give examples, illustrations. That's part of the method that I have as far as simplifying, but I hope you guys are getting benefit from it, and I'm really excited to be back in 2 weeks. Okay?
I have a couple announcements, real quick. I have a couple announcements.
Yes,
So Gina's class is July 1st, right before
holiday.
the holidays. And then we have a training on the 24th. We have a Tom Ferry coach come in, so it's gonna be on Zoom. So it's for everybody. Everybody can log on to Zoom. Huh? At 11, correct. It's on Zoom. The link should be out there already. We put the links out. And then next week we have John Reyes coming for the AI class, the video AI class. That's gonna be here at 11.
And could you also talk about my event?
And Cara has an event this coming Monday. She's having a watch party at the Upland office for Austria versus Argentina.
Yeah.
Oh, that is fun. That is fun. Yes.
I'll see you guys then.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. See you guys.
Okay.